use to help guide them through establishing a procedure, a protocol, so that they would feel comfortable that everyone in the institution was aware of what to do and what procedures were in place and how they might cope, hopefully never having to, but how they might cope with an unfortunate incident. So that information went out to universities. We've asked them to review that, and when they come back to us, we currently have Mark Young at our disposal, and that service may well be extended to universities based on what they're coming back with to us.
Thank you. We are getting closer to the moment of interruption. I just want to inform the committee at 6:30 we will have completed, or at 6 o'clock rather, we'll have completed 3 hours of estimates, and we'll have 1 hour remaining when we get back at 6:30.
Order, please. We have reached the hour of interruption. We will be doing the debate tonight on, therefore be it resolved that government bring forward their reasoning for deferring their climate change plan and discuss what can be done to expedite this important and crucial issue for Nova Scotia. The Honourable Member from Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion. At that time, nobody realized how serious climate change is, and not only in this province, but in the world. And as we do more research and see more negative things happening throughout the world, the change in our climate, you've seen the serious hurricanes that would hit us here in the few years earlier, things that hadn't happened and don't seem to happen. And the weather gets worse and worse and worse. You see disasters all over the world. And it begs to wonder, how are we going to stop this? How is this going to be stopped? It's going to take a lot of effort by everybody to slowly slow down this change and reverse it. And hopefully we're in time. There's no guarantee we are. And if we do one thing, it always seems to affect another. And when it comes to things like global warming and the climate change problems we're having, they didn't happen overnight. And the cure won't happen overnight. The unfortunate problem is we have more and more need, or we feel we have more and more need for fossil fuels. And the more fossil fuels we burn, among other things, the bigger problem we have. And as the problem gets worse and worse, it's harder to reverse it. I'm quite disappointed that the government hasn't taken a stronger stand on this and moved a lot faster in that direction. I don't think there's a person in this province that isn't concerned about climate change. And one thing that I'm very disappointed, and I've spoken about this here before in the legislature in climate change, you know, not too long ago, the government brought forward a bill for tax exemption on windmills. Because one of the municipalities, I believe, sent a tax bill to one of the windmill operators for $400,000 for 1 year. I could be off on the numbers, but it was somewhere around there. And the solution from the government was to give a grant to the municipality. The real solution is to eliminate tax on windmills and provide an atmosphere that the people will build them. That will help reverse our climate change over time. It'll take a long time, but it'll reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and other type of fuels. And not only that, it's so easy to talk narrowly about many things, but I want to talk about the windmill and wind energy today because there's so many other things we can do, but that's one thing. And if we don't tackle one item at a time, we'll never cure the problem. I believe that windmills in this province, number one, should be open to the grid so they can sell their power any place they want. If indeed municipalities need the revenue from this, maybe the compromise with that would be to give them a preferential cost for their electricity, which would indeed save them on that end and offset some of the tax loss they may have. However, the municipality should be able to collect tax on any buildings or infrastructure besides the windmill they get. And I've never seen a tax bill before that taxes a windmill on its possible capability. In other words, if you sat down and you look at a windmill and you shut it down for 6 months, you're still taxed on the label, what that thing can potentially produce. So if you get a breakdown, you got to get a part for somewhere outside the country, and it takes you a year, you have no income, but yes, you still have all the costs. And that doesn't seem fair. It doesn't really set the environment for change and change in that way. We have to look at things. I'm pleased to see we're looking at some new tidal power projects, that again, which will help eliminate some of the problems we're having with climate change. And again, these are only small things. All these small things go together. It's like saving a penny a day. You don't have much money at the end of a week, but over several years, you have quite a bit of money. And you've got to, that's the way we've got to think about this. To look about the garbage and how we've changed our garbage and how we're diverting many more things now. And indeed, that has been an improvement for our province. In reality, we shouldn't have a garbage dump. We should not have a dump in the city or anywhere in the province. That every bit of garbage that's produced should be able to be recycled and reused or put to another use, but it should never be buried just for the sake of burying it. We've seen the government seriously consider burning tires at a time when our environment is at such a critical point. That definitely wouldn't help us. But hopefully now they'll come up with a new system to reuse these tires in aggregate or whatever the case may be, and hopefully some entrepreneurs in the province will come up with some innovative ideas and indeed save us a lot of effort and a lot of money in that regard, as well as protecting and helping our environment. Unfortunately, with our society we do need tires, and we do have to move forward in that direction. But we're seeing more efficient fuel vehicles with fuel. I'm still not convinced that the hybrid vehicles are the way to go yet. I think they will eventually when the technology gets better, but we have to work in that direction. That's a direction we also have to go in. We have to look at other issues such as solar power and make sure we exploit that and get that every bit as industrialized as we possibly can. Also, we have to look at solar panels, heating solar panels. And one thing that the government hasn't done at all, which I'm quite disappointed in, we did some work with energy. They've done some work with energy efficiency, and I actually had energy audit done on my own home, and it showed me some areas that I can improve on. Now, I'll make those improvements because I can afford to do them. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that have high energy costs and can't afford to insulate their homes better, to replace the windows, do all the things you need to do to make your home energy efficient. And one thing, if you do make a home energy efficient, that's a long-term gain for our environment, because the investment you put in it today goes on for years and years and years and years. It's not like an automobile. You tune your automobile up and you check the tire pressure, which indeed will improve your gas mileage. But over time, the tire pressure will go down. If you forget to check it, your gas mileage goes down. If the tune goes out of tune in your car, your gas mileage goes down again. And there's really no monitors on cars to tell you what your mileage is on most vehicles. So when you look at that, the best investment, immediate investment, is in homes. So if you look at better insulation in homes, better construction techniques and laws that protect the construction of homes to make sure that they're built to new energy standards, and those are long-term investments. That house will pay back for years and years and years and years and years, and ultimately reduce the dependence on fossil fuel and any other type of fuel. Makes it more appropriate to use solar panels or indeed panels, electricity through windmills or any other kind of alternate fuel source that can heat a home and not generate greenhouse gases. Because if the house is easy to heat, it doesn't take much to heat it. Now that's sort of a weird statement to make, but it's true. If you make a home extremely efficient, you may pay $3,000 or $4,000 a year to heat your home now. You could probably, if you really got efficient with that home and really watch what you're doing, you could get your heat bill down to $500 to $700 or $800 a year. Now that's a significant reduction in oil, if, for instance, if you used oil to heat your home or even electricity. And that's where we have to go. We have to make short investments for long-term improvement. And if we do those things and we do them properly, and I haven't seen this government move in that direction yet, and we have to do this quickly, we'd be better off to provide funding, especially to seniors and people with modest incomes, that they could insulate their homes. In the 70s, we started that process, and then the whole program was canceled when we really found out there was no crisis in the shortage of fuel. It was just something that was generated by the oil companies to make more money. But if we continue those things and insulate homes better and do them properly so they don't rot and some of the problems that when they're not done properly, if you do all those things, plus invest in alternate energy, we would go a long ways in starting to address the issue we have. And I challenge the government to do that because we have to do this for every single person. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Minister of Environment.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to this motion. I have already indicated why the climate change plan is coming due in September, in part because the consultations with the public were delayed due to inclement weather and had to be rescheduled, and in part because a little more work needed to be done on adaptation and on the importance of adaptation. We know, and those of you who are at the Power of Green conference, the first Power of Green, which was an excellent conference put on by the government, know that the experts are saying that we need to do mitigation and adaptation together, and that you get the best bang for your buck, to use a truism, when you tackle mitigation and adaptation together. We'll be having the Power of Green 2 this fall, and I invite those in the House and anyone who may be listening to come to it. It was an excellent conference last year. There weren't as many MLAs as I would have hoped for, and so maybe this year we might be able to encourage a few more to come, but we had speakers that were top rate, and I've been to a few conferences, not a lot, on environmental issues, and this one was second to none. So Power of Green number 2 coming up this fall, and I'd like to encourage people to come to that. The importance of climate change can't be overstated, and as the honourable member from the Liberal caucus noted, this is one of the most important things that we as human beings have to deal with. Unfortunately, in some ways, it takes some sort of dramatic weather event to bring this to people's attention. We're not sure, Mr. Speaker, whether Katrina was directly tied to climate change. Certainly there are those who feel that and who make the claim that climate change will result in more severe hurricanes, not necessarily more hurricanes, but more severe ones. And we do know that White Juan here in Nova Scotia brought to the attention of many people that something was happening to the climate. And so it's those sorts of things that need to happen for this challenge to impinge on people's consciousness. And that's unfortunate because it's something that we should be deeply concerned about all the time and moving forward on aggressively. There are misconceptions out there too that I think stand in the way of further action. Up until about a year ago, you'd still hear the sort of wide misconception that climate change isn't happening, that the global temperature is not warming. That seems to have died down from even the most extreme groups. But there is still many groups claiming that while climate change, while the Earth is warming, that it's due to 150,000 year warming cycles, sunspots, and that there's no sort of human contribution due to greenhouse gases, and therefore really nothing to be done about it. And that too, I think, is a misconception. The International Panel on Climate Change, and I've talked to a few of the members on it, and one of the leading members on it from Trinidad, from the small island states, who's looking at the effect on coastal areas and coastal islands, which Nova Scotia is, told me that the consensus has now emerged with the scientists, not only that it's happening, but that anthropogenic causes are certainly accepted as being a key factor in climate change. So we're starting to move forward as a society to deal with this, overcoming those misconceptions which have slowed action on it. It wasn't that long ago that the Premier of Alberta, the former Premier, talked about how it could be dinosaur farts causing climate change. And it's that sort of attitude, Mr. Speaker, that I think is part of the challenge that we have in getting sustained public attention to this important topic. So I'm grateful that it's being raised in this forum and that we're having an opportunity to debate this issue. The other obvious reason why action isn't happening as quickly as it should is that this is a global problem. And it's the tragedy of the commons, as it were, writ large, where any individual nation, or jurisdiction, there's no real benefit in that individual jurisdiction or nation taking action, and yet if no one takes action, then we destroy this world, or we at least destroy the ability of human beings to enjoy the world as we know it. The other thing that's challenging about global warming, climate change, if you will, is that it's one of the few pollutants I know of that is not made better by economic growth. In fact, it was quite interesting, Benjamin Friedman in his award-winning book he just published recently called The Moral Imperatives of Economic Growth, who's sort of a paean of praise for economic growth. But he does make the admission in that book that all the other pollutants such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, volatile organic compounds, ozone even, all of those are approved by a growing economic system which can deal with them through various technological means. And the one exception to that is CO2 levels, which are actually go up rather than down. And so we have great challenges, Mr. Speaker, in terms of getting sustained public attention. I'm not talking just about Nova Scotia, but worldwide, and we've seen that, and this uneven response to it is something that causes or undermines any sort of coordinated action, which is what we're going to need on it. For example, I was reading an issue in the Walrus magazine, which my aide has given me as a Christmas present. Very interesting magazine. I enjoy reading it. And the opening editorial of the current issue, he surveys the reaction to climate change across Canada and makes the observation that any gains that British Columbia is making are more than offset by Alberta. And so it's that sort of fact that we need to tackle it globally that makes it a challenging and a difficult proposition. Here in Nova Scotia, we've taken the position in tandem with the New England states and with the eastern provinces leaders, and I have to note this because the New England states were signaled out in Al Gore's film The Inconvenient Truth for being leaders in this regard, and we're in lockstep with them in terms of the goals that we've set, which is a 10% reduction from 1990 levels, which would be about 25% reduction from where we are right now, and a 36% reduction if we allow business to continue as usual. So we've committed ourselves to some very dramatic changes, and we've begun work on that, Mr. Speaker. We've begun work on it in many different ways. The member talks about home efficiency and may not be aware, we may not have touted it as we should, but my colleague, the Minister of Community Services, has rolled out a program, and so far about 150 low-income homes have been totally redone and brought up to top standards in order to help minimize emissions and in order to help minimize greenhouse gas emissions and also help minimize fuel bills associated with that. We also have, Mr. Speaker, we have the program through EGSPA on building standards that he was calling for, and building standards are being incorporated in government buildings and being asked for in others. We also have EcoTrust funding, and Mr. Speaker, tomorrow I will be announcing over about $1.5 million in funding to various municipal units, about 5 in total, for 5 very innovative programs and projects that will help reduce greenhouse gases in those municipalities. And we have more rounds of municipal funding to announce We have about $6 million out of the 7.5 million in that particular pocket in Echo Trust to announce, but we'll be announcing the first of the large grants. I'll be announcing that at the UNSM meetings tomorrow. So we're very, very aggressive, but I do go back to my member, the Minister of Community Services, who, as I said, had a very innovative program with low-income homes, about 150 of them, and we'd like to see that expanded. So there are many different things we've been doing, Mr. Speaker. The protected areas that we have, one here near Halifax was equivalent to about 50,000 cars being taken off the road a year. So we'll be bringing out our climate change plan in September, but we've been doing many things already in anticipation of that. But we'll have an aggressive and a good plan, the very blessed plan that we can come up with. And so I thank the honourable members for discussing this very, very important issue.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too am pleased to rise on the topic of climate change tonight. And Nova Scotia is a leader on climate change, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, what we're a leader in is rhetoric. And there is a yawning gap between the rhetoric of the government and the actual reality of what the government is doing. And the fact that the climate change strategy has been delayed for at least 6 months is just another example of the gap between rhetoric and reality. The essence of the resolution that's before us is to seek an explanation from the government about why that is. Now, we did have a chance to ask the minister about this during the budget debate, and I'm glad that he repeated his answer here tonight, because of course the budget debate over in the Red Room isn't on the record, but this is on the record, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what the minister told us over in estimates. He said that when his new old Department of the Environment inherited the climate change file from the Department of Energy, he was presented with a draft PowerPoint. Now, so the government had announced that the climate change action plan would be released this spring, and now we're into May, and the minister said that he saw this document 2 or 3 weeks ago. So at the time the government had announced this plan was going to be released, there was no plan ready, there was no draft plan ready, there wasn't even a PowerPoint presentation ready. The minister described it as a draft PowerPoint. And it's clear that when the minister saw it, he was aghast at what he saw, because he immediately said, we can't release that. And so he said he's going to table it for 6 months. Why exactly? Well, we don't know, because the minister won't release the so-called draft PowerPoint presentation. We understand that part of the reason may be that the Department of Energy, being the Department of Energy, was focused on intensity-based targets. Now, everybody who knows anything at all about climate change know that intensity-based targets are the targets picked by people who don't believe in climate change and don't believe that anything needs to be done about it. So if that's the reason, we congratulate the minister for deferring release of the report, because clearly that would not do. However, we do not know what was in that draft PowerPoint presentation, because the process at this point is going on behind closed doors, which is the preferred mode of action of this government. Now, Mr. Speaker, on the climate change, Nova Scotia is not a leader except in rhetoric. On April 22nd, Earth Day, the Premier's office announced that Nova Scotia had joined the Climate Registry, which is a voluntary registry by which greenhouse gas emissions are monitored and reported. But, Mr. Speaker, what the Premier's press release didn't say that day is that Nova Scotia was not the first province to join the Climate Registry, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. It was, in fact, the 8th province to join the Climate Registry, joining almost all of the American states, Mr. Speaker, including Shell Oil Company had joined the climate registry before the province of Nova Scotia did, Mr. Speaker. So Nova Scotia really joined a bandwagon that was well along the road, and yet they proclaim this on Earth Day as a sign of Nova Scotia's leadership on the issue. The only two provinces left, Mr. Speaker, that haven't joined the climate registry are our major petroleum-producing provinces, namely Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador, and it seems unlikely that they ever will join. Also, the Premier's announcement that day contained no timelines. There's a great deal of work that has to be done in order to meet the manual of the climate registry, which is over 200 pages long, very detailed. It's got to be verified by an independent third party, all that kind of stuff. There was absolutely no information in the government's announcement. It seemed clear that the purpose of the news release on April 22nd was to be able to say something, anything, on Earth Day. But like almost all announcements of the government on the environment, when you actually prod it a little bit and see what's actually going on, the rhetoric is far, far ahead of the reality. Same could be said about the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, which the government likes to trumpet as proof of its leadership. During the estimates debate, I did ask the minister for proof behind his statements that Nova Scotia is a recognized leader on climate change. If anybody, and I'm still waiting for that, Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind the minister that I asked for it and he promised he would give it to me, Mr. Speaker. But if anybody said it, it was because of the rhetoric in the act. But let's remember, Mr. Speaker, that these are distant goals. These are distant goals to be set in 2020, 12 years from now. Now, who in this House really believes that this government will still be the government 12 years from now? That this minister will still be the minister 12 years from now? The act was passed last year, so between 2007 and 2020, it's 13 years, Mr. Speaker. How many members in the House, of the all 52, how many members of the whole 52 were here 13 years ago? The answer, of course, is 4. 4 out of the 52, and a couple of them are over there right now, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 4, and we can expect that 13 years from now, 4 out of the 52 members will probably still be here. That's the rate of turnover we have in this House. So it's not terribly convincing to hear the government or this minister talk about what they're going to do in 2020, because it's a pretty safe bet that that minister and that government won't be sitting over there in 2020. That's why they like setting those distant goals, Mr. Speaker, because it sounds like there's accountability, but there really isn't. Mr. Speaker, not only are the goals distant, the goals are weak. The existing science says that the goal set by our government is not strong enough. And who is it who says that, Mr. Speaker? It's our government itself. In the Department of Environment Business Plan, acknowledges that current science would indicate that the goals that we have set in that Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act are probably not high enough. So I asked the minister if the government was planning to amend the act to set a more ambitious, more necessary goal, and his answer was no, they would not, because it was a minimum goal. And so they're going to stay with a goal that they themselves acknowledge probably won't get us to where we need to go. Over and above that, Mr. Speaker, the minister in the estimates debate also acknowledged that the 10% goal is going to be very difficult to achieve anyway. What we really need to do, Mr. Speaker, is we need to have a government that goes beyond the rhetoric to the reality. We need a government that's going to be a leader, not a government that becomes the 8th province in Canada to join the registry, Mr. Speaker. We need a government that's going to be there first. We need a government that's progressive on the environment, on climate change, like British Columbia, like Quebec, like Manitoba. Those are the provinces that are the acknowledged leaders, Mr. Speaker, on climate change, not Nova Scotia. We need a government that is at the table when carbon cap and trade systems are being negotiated, Mr. Speaker, so that the solution is one that fits the reality of Nova Scotia's economy, where we are in the design, where people want to know what it is that Nova Scotia is doing and saying, because we really are leaders, Mr. Speaker, but instead we are badly trailing other provinces, Mr. Speaker. We are badly trailing other provinces. What's really going to solve our problem on climate change, Mr. Speaker, is for us to join in the design and then be an early adopter of a carbon cap and trade system, an international cap and trade system, Mr. Speaker. And the reason that that's what we need to do is that will unleash the ingenuity and the innovation of the people of Nova Scotia. If they have the incentives, if business knows what the rules are, knows where we're headed, then it's not the government that has to do it. It is the people of Nova Scotia, the business of Nova Scotia, who will allow their ingenuity and innovation to be unleashed, and they will show the way to how this province and the reality of this province, how we can achieve the targets on climate change. But instead, Mr. Speaker, we are content with a government that is a leader in rhetoric. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The time allotted for the hour of interruption has elapsed. We shall now take a short recess to get prepared for estimates.
The Committee on Supply is called back to order. When we left off, the honourable member from Kings West had the floor. The honourable member from Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and pleased to continue with the estimates on education. One of the references that my colleague, a member of Citadel, made to the minister in one of his comments was that she was an older rookie, but that's a dangerous road to go down, so I won't go there. I'm just going to say that perhaps a rookie showing lots of energy and stamina, she goes into 11th hour of estimates over the last 2 or 3 days. And so I do commend the minister for that, and I know she's had a little family worry to deal with as well. So I appreciate what she's given to the House in the last few days. With that, I wanted to start off on an area that perhaps needs some explanation around, as opposed to whether it's a troublesome part of the MOU, and that's the 9th clause in the MOU, which is speaking about the transition funding allocation formula, which utilizes an enrollment average for the years, and then goes on to explain how in each of the next 3 years of the MOU that years past will be used to determine the notational allocation in terms of funding. And I would just like to have a little bit of an explanation, because I'm not sure exactly how this may help or may not be enough help in terms of transitional funding. One of the concerns that I would relate to that is the fact that we're already seeing signs that CBU and Acadia with enrollment challenges, whether or not this transitional funding allocation formula will be of help or enough help as they deal with those issues in the coming years.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member referring, of course, to the MOU that was signed with universities, between universities and the province. And that process of negotiating an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with universities proved to be a good process. We were currently operating in the third year of a previously negotiated MOU. And one of the benefits of the MOU was that it gave universities some predictability and some stability, Mr. Chair, in their funding. And so when we got into the third year and looking at where we would go from there, it appeared that all parties were interested in going back to negotiate another Memorandum of Understanding. And when the plans were made to look at who would be participating in those negotiations, it was agreed that university students were important members of this process and were invited to have representation on the negotiating team, along with the representation from Concept, from the presidents of the universities, and also from the department. So those representatives sat down, and a good process, because all parts of the post-secondary, environment were represented there. And it was an agreement between the universities and the department, and thus the representation. And when the negotiations began, Mr. Chair, they looked at what would be included in that agreement. And the success of the previous one certainly gave some direction to the second memorandum. And funding, of course, being the main issue. And as the member has mentioned, there is a clause there that speaks to transitional funding. And during the course of the last MOU, we all recognized that there had been enrollment declines. We're experiencing that in our schools, and we know that universities were experiencing the same thing. So there was a need to address that and to come to some agreement within the MOU that would allow universities to adjust to the declining enrollment that they were experiencing. Two universities in particular have been mentioned, Acadia and Cape Breton University, who had the most serious enrollment decline. And the members of the negotiating team recognized that it would be unfair to apply a formula that would be detrimental to the operating and the continuation of both those institutions. And so there was the transitional clause that was put in there, and it was a clause that will allow a transition or a gradual move to a funding formula that's based on enrollment. To do that all in 1 year would have been have a significant impact and a very negative impact on the funding for those two universities. So there was an agreement that over the 3 years, 3 years of the MOU, that they would do a 25, 25, 25, and that would allow the universities to adjust to the new funding that they would get, but they agreed, they believed, and they agreed that that would not be detrimental to their ability to continue to operate. So thus the transitional clause, and as I said, both of those universities have accepted that and will work with that. There's always, because it's a 3-year MOU, we get to the 75% by the end of that MOU. But, I guess there's always the expectation and the hope, and it will happen, that the enrollments in universities are monitored during the course of that 3 years. And at the end of the MOU, if it has the success that the previous one had and the success we predict this one will have, I would expect we'll be looking at another set of negotiations.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kingswest.
One of the areas left to deal with, from my perspective, in terms of universities, is the university connection to teacher education in this province. We know that we have undergone, of course, a review. There were many parts of the review which were strong, which were positive, and which pointed some direction for future teacher education in the province. I felt perhaps it did get skewed perhaps a little bit too strongly by the labor force report around the number of teachers which came out during that review that was going on around the province. But I'm hoping that through the ministers and the government's intentions to bring in some regulations in the fall that will help guide through the next period around teacher education and certification, that in fact that may end up being the strongest beginnings that the review had to offer. However, I am a little bit dismayed at the member opposite, who, in talking about university autonomy, seemed to indicate almost, hands-off in terms of the delivery of the BED program in our province. And while I have the greatest respect for all universities in the province, having attended 2 for degrees and 2 others for courses, the autonomy of a university is indeed a very, very special part of the academic freedom that a university has. However, the BED program is a certification program that does need guidelines, that should have certain criteria, that in fact should be designed to deliver the best teachers for the schools of Nova Scotia. And that's why I feel there has to be a very relevant, a very important link with the Department of Education. And again, one of the recommendations that did come from the review panel was that there be an advisory committee. And I think that advisory committee can have enormous potential in lots of collaboration, in lots of discussion and discernment around what in fact may be best practices for that BED program. So first of all, I'd like to hear the minister's comment around teacher education in this province currently, and maybe even a little bit of how she envisions the future as well.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to my colleague across the way. We certainly do share common backgrounds as far as our training and our profession and our interest in teacher education in the province. And I think we do recognize the importance of quality training, having well-qualified, dedicated, committed teachers in our classrooms, because we do have a responsibility, Mr. Chair, to every student in this province to make sure that they are, in fact, engaged with a teacher who clearly understands how students learn, clearly understands the curriculum and the variety of strategies that teachers need to have in order to respond to the variety of needs. And the first place that students will learn that, Mr. Chair, is in their teacher training program. And therefore, it's absolutely critical that we as a government and as a department do whatever we can to make sure that that program students follow is the very best that it possibly can be. And so I don't think there's any question, I don't think there's any dispute that the member opposite and I share that interest and that desire and that belief and accept that responsibility. The teacher education review certainly provided lots of information, lots of ideas, involved a lot of consultation, and the three-person panel are to be commended for the work they did to make sure that they made themselves accessible, that they visited all parts of the province, they provided opportunity and invited participation so that when their report was completed, it truly reflected the ideas and the feelings of Nova Scotians. And they were a very credible team, and they certainly gave their time and attention to the important task that I had given them. And so when they presented their report and recommendation, again, I received that, but I wanted to make sure that, again, Nova Scotians had another opportunity, and that was an opportunity to see what that report looked like, what those recommendations were, and so we left that out for a period of time to get that reaction. And again, there were hundreds of emails and letters and submissions, and many of those, I might say, were from the universities in this province themselves. And that tells me that they are keenly interested in how we deliver teacher education, even if they are not one of the universities who currently have that as a program. The Shapiro report, you know, Mr. Speaker, identified the universities where BED programs would be delivered, that being Acadia, Mount St. Vincent, St. X, and University of St. Anne. But it wasn't just those universities that took interest in what we were doing. We had submissions from other universities. We had representation from other universities. I had university presidents and academic VPs come and speak to me and share their thoughts. So it generated a lot of interest, a lot of discussion across the province, and I think that sends a strong message that there is a keen interest in this province in making sure that the teachers we have in our classrooms are the very best they can be. The member opposite mentioned the whole issue of supply and demand, and we know that that report was released around the same time, and it did have some influence on the recommendations that the committee prepared. And you know, my response to that indicated that there needed to be a broader interpretation of some of those statistics in that supply and demand report. And I believe that the response that we came up with and delivered is a true reflection of what Nova Scotians feel and the direction that we should go. The whole report was premised on two things. Number one, that we maintain and improve on the quality programming that we currently have. And number two, that we make sure that we provide options for students who wish to study in Nova Scotia to be able, if they have the qualifications, to enter into a BED program in our province. Also wanted to look at, and we've discussed much over the last 3 days, the tuition rates in our province, the cost of education, how our government has provided student assistance programs. And so with those universities that I mentioned, Mount St. Vincent, Acadia, and St. X, their programs in teacher training are a 4+2. That's 6 years of university studies, 4 years for your undergraduate and 2 BED years. And we recognize that that's costly for university students. So I wanted to look at other models that could be delivered in this province, whether it is an integrated program, whether it's a 4+1 or a 5+ or a 4+2. But again, to give students more choices. So my response, again, focused on how can we do that? How can we give them more choices? And it's up to the student, and I believe in giving choices. They have a choice to stay in Nova Scotia if they wish to. They'll have a choice to take a program of a duration that is of interest to them and that they can afford. And the third thing is that they will have a choice of where in Nova Scotia they do that program. We know that, again, the Shapiro report, the universities that were identified were on the mainland. And during the panel's travels around the province, they heard very clearly from the folks in Cape Breton that there was a need for a BEd program on Cape Breton Island, and the importance to those students to be able to attend a program close to their home and not have to incur the additional expenses of residency or living away from home. So all of that played into the report and recommendations and to my response to that. And so I believe that we did recognize all of that when we came out with our response. I want to speak to something else that the member opposite mentioned, and that's the Minister's Advisory Council. And I firmly believe that we need to continue to hear from those people who have a vested interest in and a knowledge of teacher education. And so on that Ministerial Advisory Committee, there will be representation from the different partners in education. We've already had letters of interest and expressions of interest at the office, resumes, in fact, of people who might want to serve on that advisory committee. And so it goes beyond just the university determining what program they will offer, what their curriculum will look like. There has to be a link between what they offer and what we need in our public schools. And I believe the advisory committee will give us that link, and it will allow us to make sure that the programs that are delivered prepare our young people as best they can for positions in the classroom. So I'm pleased to be able to move forward with that advisory committee with the recommendations that we believe will improve and enhance the teacher education programs in our province.
Thank you. The honourable member from Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Madam Minister, for that overview and some of your strongly held beliefs as Minister, and also reflecting where the Department of Education currently is. And I'm certainly pleased to hear that there is, wanting to be and will be maintained a very, very strong link between the teacher education program in universities so that they're not theory-bound, but they have a very strong connection to our classrooms, and that in fact they are preparing our teachers for the next generation of Nova Scotians to the greatest extent possible. And I think this advisory council does have the potential to I think, once again, draw on the strengths of each of the programs delivered in our universities currently, and perhaps come up with best models of practicums and teachers in the schools, because after all, that is the link that needs to be made. Also, in terms of the advisory council, we know that we have some serious gaps in terms of teachers and their backgrounds, and especially in the area of math, which is proving to be a very troublesome area for our province in getting our achievement levels to a higher degree. When we have 67% of our high school math teachers without a math background or a significant math background, and only 37% of our junior high teachers with math in their background, and that's where the foundations are laid for a successful high school math success. So I'm hoping that this advisory council as well will help in having more students arrive in the BED programs who will fill some of those current needs that we do have in the system. The other relational piece to teacher education that I believe we need some, if you wish, corrections or some new criteria is around certification. We know that there will always be Nova Scotians whose parents will get transferred to other parts of the country and then will come back to Nova Scotia after getting their teacher training in other provinces or perhaps in some of the states and other jurisdictions. And I'm not saying that we need to use certification as a means to control the number of teachers that would be available in the province, but perhaps in light of the strong programs that we have established in this province. Think of the number of recruiters that show up at Acadia, Mount St. Vincent, and St. FX in order to get some of our students to go to Alberta, to Ontario, to the United Kingdom. North Carolina is a state that comes to Nova Scotia. So we're highly regarded in what we do. And that's why I thought that was a good reason perhaps to expand the CBU and in fact to have more students educated in Nova Scotia, but with some limitations obviously on the numbers. So to get back to the area that I was going around certification, I'm wondering if that will be part of a connection to the review that has just been done, and is that an area of concern to the Minister?
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, when we talked about the number of seats that we would have in the province and the number of seats that we would fund, we recognize that we have a change in our demographics as far as teachers that we have in this province. And we recognize that even with, like with retirements, our projected number of retirements for next year is 330 some teachers who will be retiring. We have in our budget that we've proposed 157 new positions. So when you look at those demands on our teacher pool of teachers, I think it's obvious that we needed to expand the number of seats. And I want to make mention before I go to the certification, your comment about teachers and their teachables and the discipline in which they are prepared to teach. And in order to make sure that we can continue to build on and perhaps improve the whole business of teachers teaching out of subject area, we wanted to make sure that there was some expectation that those new seats that we were prepared to fund would address that demand issue. And math, as we've said, is one of those areas. It's an area where at the junior high we have the fewest number of teachers teaching in their own area of expertise. We need more math teachers. And so what we said to the university's CBU with their additional seats and a partnership with the Mount and St. Mary's is we expect that with CBU, because they had the larger number, that at least 70% of their teachers who fill those seats, or the students who fill those seats, will graduate with one of the teachables that we require, that being math, sciences, French, and technology. So we're trying again to, I guess, make sure that we are able to meet the demand, the number of teachers, and those make sure they have the background that they need. when we look at the question of certification, and we certified over 1,000 teachers last year. We know that about 400 of those graduated from our own universities in the province. So we have about 600 teachers who have applied for certification in Nova Scotia, and some of them came from Atlantic provinces, and the question of their certification and ours has been raised. And there is a reciprocal agreement among the 4 Atlantic provinces that acknowledges and recognizes certifications one with another. When someone from outside of the Atlantic provinces presents themselves for certification, there is an assessment process that we use, and we look at the program they've gone through and also how that matches up with what we would expect our students to have completed before they get our Nova Scotia certification. In some cases, they are given a bridging certificate, Mr. Chair, and that simply means that there's something that they have to do to fulfill that requirement that we would have and make them, bring them, I guess, to the same standard that we would want our teachers to have going into our classrooms. So there's an advisory committee. And again, an advisory committee, I believe, serves the minister well because it brings expertise to the table and gives me the advice that I need to move forward. So there is an advisory committee on teacher certification. We have a process in place to make sure the teachers we do acknowledge through the reciprocal agreement, and that if teachers come and need some further upgrading or additional courses, that's identified. They know exactly what they have to do. They have a bridging certificate until they do that, and once they do, then they get their teacher certificate. So it's an ongoing process, but it's one I believe, again, speaks to the standard that we want our teachers in our classrooms to have.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Madam Minister, for that perspective on certification, which I was pleased to hear that it is an area that does occasionally get attention in order to strengthen the criteria and to make sure that those who are entering the province from other institutions or who've been teaching in other jurisdictions, in fact, have some commonalities in their preparation. We're into the last half hour, roughly, here of the very long, I guess, education estimates this year. So I guess this half hour will be a little bit of a grab bag, since I do have a number of areas that I was wanting to hear the minister speak to. One of the areas that I heard from 2 school boards was the student information system. And we know that it's had a bit of a derailment, and we know that this can be very helpful, very significant in planning for the future, and lessen the difficulty in tracking information across regions, and probably, and therefore right across the province. We know with high quality information, better planning can go on, better analysis of what we are doing, and so it's a system that many today feel very strongly about in our school system. And I'm wondering where that currently stands, Madam Minister.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, to the member, member raises a very important issue here, and one that has not moved along as quickly as we would like it to. We recognize that the collection of data at each board level, or even at each school level, is critical. The value in having statistics is to see where you are, plan where you want to go, and then monitor to see how you get there. And if you don't have that information, then it's pretty hard to base your planning on some statistics. So there's obviously a great need to have a database where you can have that information. What's happened across the province is that boards have developed their own system of information management, and they've done a good job of that, but it is a bit of a patchwork, and not all systems will easily talk to the others. So it presents a problem with the increased mobility that we have of families moving around the province, even from school to school, but more particularly from one board to another. And so it is a challenge, and the systems information, student information system that takes all of that and puts it together in one system, Mr. Chair, is extremely expensive. An estimated price to do that for all of our school boards is about $12.5 million, and that's huge. So without that money in place, we are dealing the best we can with what we have. However, as recently as today, there has been a meeting, a deputy with the representatives from the boards, and they have agreed that we have to work together on this. We have to look at how boards can contribute. There are, as I said, there are different systems in different boards. Maybe there's one of those that can be modified, it can be adapted, and it can be accepted. But there is a willingness to work together on that and see if we can come up with something that will help with that easy storage and transmission of data. We don't have it, and as I said, it's costly, but it's someplace we do have to go.
Thank you. The Honourable, the member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the topics that we hear often among educators, administrators, and teachers is the area of school discipline. And we know that, in fact, in this House, we have raised the issue of the number of suspensions that occur in some jurisdictions, in some of our boards. And again, the amount of time that is required to deal with them by review committees, by suspension committees. We know that there are also some, I guess, developments in some schools whereby they're not giving the students an external holiday. They're not doing as many external suspensions. They're keeping the students in school. And one of the models is having a teacher who has expressed a desire to take 4, 5, maybe upwards of 6 students who are suspended, who has a very wide background in a number of subject areas, and in fact they're keeping the students in school and they're doing teaching with the students. They're not just acting as a cop or a supervisor, which also happens in some of our internal suspension rooms. And I've heard of a model in Parkview High School that is proving to be very successful. And in fact, over the last number of months, teachers are talking about students that were suspended, kept in school, and the teacher kept up with the lessons every day, the homework requirements. And when students went back in the classroom, they were surprised to see that, in fact, the students were right up to par with those in the classroom. I'm wondering if the department is looking at models like this. They're a little bit more obviously demanding of financial resources, but again, improving the environment in our schools and keeping students in our schools is very, very critical. And I'm wondering if the minister has been taking a look at some ways to improve school climate and the area of discipline and success with suspensions.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the member raises, again, another and very, very important part of a student's day in school and a teacher's day in school. And we recognize that if students aren't in class and if they're not engaged in the learning process, then we can't expect them to make progress academically. So the whole notion of suspension from a classroom takes on new meaning, and no longer do we encourage or even support out of school suspensions unless it's a very severe situation and the safety of the student or other students certainly would play into that. What has evolved over the years is that teachers and administrators have recognized that, so they've tried to make sure that, for example, if a student's behavior is disruptive to the classroom, we recognize that there has to be some measure where that student perhaps is removed from the classroom, but not necessarily from the school environment. And what has happened is that many boards, Mr. Chair, have implemented in-school suspensions. And in-school suspensions, of course, allow for the student to continue on with their learning, but in an environment where they are not disrupting the others in the class and where they are, again, still able to continue on with their learning. We have some boards, one board in particular, that has an in-school suspension program in all of their high schools. And in fact, they have a system where students may come out of their school and go to a school suspension classroom where there are several other students there who have been suspended, but there is a teacher there responsible for those students. And of course, the ratio there is a better ratio, more individual attention, and so on. But I think I think it's acknowledging that we have challenges and students have challenges, but we also have responsibilities, and we have to make sure that we try to keep those students engaged and at the same time give them some counseling or some remediation, I guess, with their behavior so that they can be integrated back into the classroom successfully. The PEBS program, the Positive Effective Behaviors program, that we have in many of our schools and are expanding it is a very encouraging model. It does address, as the name says, positive behavior, reinforcing positive behavior rather than punishing negative behavior. And so that approach appears to be working, Mr. Chair. And of course, overarching all of that, the department does have a code of conduct, and then within that and under that umbrella, each board would have their own discipline policies and procedures. But one of the ways that, again, that we try to keep students who are disengaged active is to provide those supports on the site rather than out-of-school suspensions.
Thank you. The member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Madam Minister, for that overview. And it seems like we've had a bit of a natural evolution around just having students go to a classroom with rotation of teachers to a dedicated teacher who, in fact, is very involved and instrumental in keeping the work of the students up. And so we know that we need to keep our students in school. There was an issue that was in the media during the past year, and I don't remember right off the actual statistics, but the absenteeism level in some Cape Breton schools was brought to the media, and I'm sure a concern of parents, school administrators, central office, and school board. I'm wondering if the minister was involved with that, or if the board and central office looked after that. But when you had the numbers, which were I believe, in the range of 100 to 200 students with 30 to 40% absenteeism. And I'm prepared to have the minister correct me on those figures, since it is a little time, and I hadn't really prepared for that question today, but is one that that came to me because as we talk about discipline, decorum, and making sure that taxpayer dollars are developing the strongest public education system. So I'm wondering if the minister could comment if she had any connection to that event.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this really I can go back and refer to something that I spoke of just in the previous question, and that is if students are not in the classroom and they're not engaged in the learning process, then obviously no learning is taking place. So whether it's suspension because of behavior or whatever, or whether it's absenteeism from the classroom, those are serious concerns. And we have to take every step we can to make sure that we do have our students in the classroom with a teacher as much of the instructional time as we possibly can. So the notion of absenteeism is a real issue. Principals, just to let you know, Mr. Chair, some of the things that we're doing, principals have come together. This, although it was highlighted in some Cape Breton schools, it's not unique to Cape Breton schools. It is an issue in every school, in every high school. And so the principals of our schools have come together to look at what the issue is and what some solutions to that might be. And we have attendance policies, and we look at strategies to keep students in school. But what's happening right now is we have the people who are on the ground and working with these students, i.e. the principals, coming together with a healthy debate, looking at best practices, looking at what's fair to the students, but also what's fair to the teachers who have a responsibility to deliver a program and to see students move through that program successfully. And when they're not in the classroom, it's very difficult for that to happen. So I'm looking forward to the outcome of the principals' debate, and that committee, as I said, will be recommending some changes or some direction that either we at the provincial level or the boards can go to make sure that that problem not only doesn't continue, but that we have fewer students who are absent from our classrooms.
Thank you. The Honourable, the member for Kings West.
Just one perhaps last question. I know, and then just maybe a comment to end off with before the minister makes some closing remarks. There is again a lot of attention being drawn to the delivery of math programs in this province. It's not just about teacher backgrounds and qualifications to teach math, but the semestering versus the year-long delivery of math is getting a great deal of attention. We know some students, because of their interest and propensity towards math, will take 2 courses a year, and therefore, in effect, even with semestering, are getting year-long math instruction. Also, the fact that semestering does, by its very nature, speed up the presentation of concepts, and perhaps a lot less time for practice and for making sure that students are well grounded before moving on to the next higher level concepts, and since it's a sequential process. So I'm wondering if the department or if the minister has had discussions around year-long math for all of our high school students in Nova Scotia.
Thank you. The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's not the first time we've heard about the problems or the concerns with math. It was brought to my attention when the math results from grade 12 were released last year. Those math results showed less than favorable results for our grade 12 math and advanced math. And as I've said before, whenever we have an assessment, what you do with the results is just as important as doing the assessment, because the assessment is really to help you plan for the future. So we looked at those results and we tried to determine what might have contributed to those poor results. And the first thing that we determined, it was not the students. We have excellent students in this province, and so for people to make a quick assumption that it was a responsibility of the student and it was their fault the scores were not good was absolutely wrong, and we wanted to dismiss that. The next thing was, what about the teachers? And so again, we have very, very dedicated, committed teachers in our classrooms, and so you had to keep looking at, well, what may have contributed to this? And the next thing you look at is curriculum, and we recognize that in our math curriculum there were a lot of material for teachers and students to cover, and so we had to go back and look at what were the absolute essential outcomes, and make sure that we did a few things well, that we looked at core essential outcomes and had teachers focus on those. And the fourth thing, I guess, that we looked at were the number of students who wrote the math exams, the advanced math and the grade 12 regular math. And we know that about 20% of our student population is probably able and capable to handle an advanced program. And that's a round figure, but it's about 20% of your population. When we looked at the number of students who wrote the advanced math on that particular set of exams, 41% of the students in grade 12 wrote the advanced math. So then you start looking at that and saying, well, if it's designed for 20% of your students and 41% wrote, maybe that has contributed to the results that we got. And so as staff looked at that, it became quite obvious that if you have about 20% of the students who are in a program that is perhaps too challenging for them, their chances of success are less, and their marks are going to bring the average mark for that particular exam down. That same 20%, had they been in a program that would be more suited to their ability, i.e. the regular grade 12 math, would have done well and brought those scores up. So that's one of the things that we looked at, and then the challenge then is, okay, how do we help students make a choice in a course that is most suited to their ability? So we tried to work with the teachers and with students. The classroom teacher and the guidance counselors in the schools are the people who can best help students with their course selection. So that was one of the steps we took there. The other thing that we did when we looked at math was we knew that our scores in English language arts had been improving over a number of years, and so we looked at what we were doing there, and is there a model we're following there that we can apply to math? And that takes us to the assessment. We were doing assessments at grade 3, 6, and 9, identifying areas of concern in grade 3, putting mentors in place to help bridge that gap, and then tracking those students to see if that made a difference, and we found that it did. So we decided that we would apply that same model for math, and so we introduced assessments in math at grade 3, and we'll move it through 6 and 9. The other thing that we're doing, recognizing again that time is important, so we increased the amount of instructional day that students spend on math, and we increased that to 60 minutes a day. More professional development for teachers, math mentors, and again, all of the supports that we could put in to help address the problem and help the students be more successful with their math program.
Thank you. The member for Kingswith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just to end off with a comment and allow the minister time to wrap up and conclude her 12 hours on a good note, I guess. First of all, I would like to see the minister and the department, despite what the minister has talked about in terms of appropriate courses and assessments. I believe year-long math in our schools would go a very, very long way to improving our math scores, and more importantly, math in terms of the subject base for so many careers and preparation for university and community college. Also, I think we need to see O2 courses more quickly accelerated and expanded in our schools, but also some form of reach down into junior high. Junior high is still one of our problem areas in P to 12, and I think an appropriate junior high program with some of the hands-on type of experience that O2 can give will be very positive. The other one thing that I'd like to mention is that I believe at grade 9, it's not just an assessment that we need of some of the subject areas, but we need to look at aptitude of students, and we need to help them do some planning for their high school. I believe there's a real gap there in having students reviewed before taking their high school courses and giving them a plan. And I'd just like to end off by thanking the minister and her staff for the 12 hours. And I know there are a number of us in the House who have are teaching in our backgrounds, but I would recommend to all members, if they don't, get out to our schools and see some of the phenomenal things that are happening, because anytime you're having a bad day, go into one of our schools.
Thank you. I will now recognize the Honourable the Minister of Education to close the debate on her estimates. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I couldn't agree more with the member opposite that if you want to have a good day, if you want to feel good about yourself and feel that you're making a difference, go into a classroom. There's nothing any more rewarding than a career in education, and the good days certainly outweigh the bad days. So I would encourage all of you in your second career to take up education, take up teaching. We've provided you a number of options now for your teacher training program, so I'll be interested to see how many are taking it on. I do want to take this opportunity. I want to take this opportunity to thank the members opposite for their questions during the estimates, and I do hope that my responses have helped clarify, provide information, and a better understanding of what does take place in our department. It is a large department, and we have a responsibility for learners from the early learners, age 4 and up, to the adult learners, and that's a broad range. And so, so it is a very responsible department, and it's the responsibilities we take very seriously. With respect to the budget, it is the second largest budget in the government, $1.49 billion total. That's our public schools, P to 12, our community colleges, and our universities. So that is a huge budget, and it serves about 135,000 students in our public schools, 42,000 in our universities, and about 10,000 in our community colleges. So it does touch every community, it touches every family, it touches every part of this province. So I'm very pleased and proud to be part of that department, and hope that some of the activities that we have undertaken have made things better for that total student population. I would like to thank my 2 staff members who are here with me for their extra support and information that they provided during the questioning, for my staff who are in the gallery and the staff back at the department who certainly work with me to make education in this province something we can be proud of. To that end, Mr. Chair, be it resolved that a sum of $1,261,744,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Department of Education pursuant to the estimates, and be it resolved that the sum of $230,511,000 granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of assistance to universities, Department of Education, pursuant to the estimates. I so move.
Thank you. The motion before the committee is shall estimate E4 and E5 stand. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. That concludes the debate on the estimates of the Department of Education. The time allotted for debate in Committee on Supply has now expired. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would move that you now do rise and the committee report progress.
Is it agreed? Agreed. The committee reports.
Committees met, made progress, and begs leave to sit again.
Carried. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call under government bills public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Bill number 157, the Financial Measures Act.
Bill number 157, the Financial Measures Act. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise this evening and speak briefly on this year's Financial Measures Act. The Financial Measures Act enables us to move forward with our budget plan. It contains a number of tax initiatives to make Nova Scotia more competitive and to encourage business investment. It also puts into legislation significant support for our municipalities across the province. And as the Minister of Finance stated last week, Mr. Speaker, this year's budget is responsible and disciplined. We believe the measures in this legislation will make a difference to families, businesses, and communities across our province. Mr. Speaker, the Financial Measures Act includes amendments to 11 laws. The government in this province has long demonstrated its commitment to the health promotion. We understand the value of a healthier population. So this year's Financial Measures Act supports the expansion of the Healthy Living Tax Credit, Mr. Speaker. Starting in 2009, the Healthy Living Tax Credit for sport and recreational activity registration fees will be extended and expanded to include all Nova Scotians. The maximum expenditure per individual will be $500, encouraging all Nova Scotians to participate in healthy lifestyles through fitness. Once fully implemented, the expanded tax credit is expected to save Nova Scotians over $8 million per year. Mr. Speaker, we've all acknowledged the challenges we're facing given the high price of gas worldwide. And we need to think about what measures are necessary to encourage efficiency and to help ease the burden. Starting in 2009, Mr. Speaker, the province will match the federal transit tax credit. This non-refundable tax credit is calculated at the lowest personal income tax for the year, which is 8.79% currently, deducted from the amount of provincial tax owed. It will provide an estimated tax relief of $1.5 million to Nova Scotians in 2009. To the average Nova Scotian who buys a bus pass at $60 a month, the combined savings of the provincial and federal tax credits will be roughly $170 per year. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a good start. Many people already use public transit as an efficient, cost-effective way to commute, and we believe that this will be a bit more of incentive. Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, we have a small but thriving film industry. And this Financial Measures Act will once again increase the tax benefits for film and also, as the Minister of Finance said today, Minister of Economic Development said today, digital media companies. The Income Tax Act will also be amended to extend medical tax credits to include expenditures for alternative medical practitioners like naturopaths, effective January 2008. Other minor changes to the Income Tax Act will provide greater clarity, coherence, and consistency in provincial tax policy. One of these, Mr. Speaker, will enable individuals who receive split pension income to claim the provincial pension amount. Now, this is a smart change in line with the federal government's policy that will potentially impact thousands of Nova Scotians. This past year, Mr. Speaker, I believe our government has shown great support to our municipalities across the province. As members of the House are aware, this past fall, the province and the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities entered a Memorandum of Understanding. This agreement will help ease the financial burden of municipalities. The Memorandum of Understanding includes provisions in the Housing Act to phase out municipal funding to public housing over a 2-year period beginning in 2010-2011. Amendments to the Corrections Act that will freeze municipal contribution for corrections at the 2007-2008 level of funding for 2 years. Funding will be eventually phased out over a 5-year period starting in 2010-2011 and ending in 2014-2015. Amendments introduced to the Education Act will index annual increases in municipal education costs to the Nova Scotia Consumer Price Index as opposed to the higher rate of assessment growth. When this MOU is fully implemented, the total annual savings for municipalities will be around $32 million. Mr. Speaker, as you know, some fees and charges are authorized by legislation, and therefore legislative change is needed to modify them. The 2008 Financial Measures Act includes amendments in the Personal Property Security Act, the Trust and Loan Companies Act, and the Gypsum Mining Tax Act. A number of laws will be amended to implement changes to legislated fees and government charges as announced in this year's budget, such as those for reinstatement of driver's licenses, personal property, and trust and loan companies. Mr. Speaker, the changes I have highlighted indicate the importance and relevance of this year's Financial Measures Act. It represents the force behind a number of pivotal budget decisions. It's a good bill containing good measures that will make a difference to families, businesses, and communities across the province. Mr. Speaker, it is a bill worthy of full support of this House, and I am pleased at this time to move second reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Halifax Fairview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the finance critic of the official opposition, I'm pleased to rise to speak to the Financial Measures Act. Financial Measures Act being that law that embodies all the statutory changes made necessary by the government's budget. And so, to that extent, it is an essential part of the government's budget. Defeat of the Financial Measures Act would all by itself mean that the government would fall, Mr. Speaker. This makes it an unusually and extraordinarily important piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, it is difficult to see how the Financial Measures Act addresses the real needs of Nova Scotians in their daily lives. They are looking for some relief, they are looking for some help, they're looking for a better deal from the government, some sign that the government understands the challenges that they're facing. But, Mr. Speaker, the centerpiece of this budget is an increase in the electricity bill of every single household in Nova Scotia. As a result of this government's budget, of which the Financial Measures Act is a part, every single household in Nova Scotia will be paying more for their power. And, Mr. Speaker, on top of that, there are a number of tax changes, tax laws that Nova Scotians are finding it very difficult to live with. And there's one in particular that I want to begin my remarks by highlighting. And I'm going to read to the House, Mr. Speaker, a very short letter from one of my constituents. I know it's been CC'd to the Premier, so it's entirely possible that he has seen it or that one of his staff members is currently dealing with it. And it's from one of my constituents who is a senior. And he says, Mr. Speaker, I've enclosed a copy. This is a letter to me, CC'd to the Premier and to the member for Halifax-Clayton Park. Because as it so happens, this particular individual lives right on the borderline between Halifax-Clayton Park and Halifax-Fairview. And it says, Dear Sir, I've enclosed a copy of my recently received notice of assessment from the Canada Revenue Agency, and I am extremely, underlined extremely, upset. As you can see from the attached assessment, the Nova Scotia tax is $54.53 compared to the federal tax of $0. I am a senior citizen and my income is $11,754. I have lived in Nova Scotia for 75 years. If I were younger, I would move to another province in Canada. Mr. Speaker, there is another line in the letter which I don't need to read about a party that he does not intend to vote for in the next election, but I don't think that will add to the debate. But, Mr. Speaker, that is the reality of the daily lives of Nova Scotians. A senior citizen on an income of $11,754, and he pays no federal tax. But because of this government's tax policy, which is embodied in the Financial Measures Act, he does have to pay provincial tax. Now, Mr. Speaker, to you and I, the sum of money that he's talking about it does not seem like a lot, $54.53. But to this gentleman, it is a lot. It is everything. And the fact that this party and this government are the ones who decouple provincial and federal tax so that the credits don't match anymore, and they, of course, as we all know, the provincial credits are now quite a bit lower than the federal credits, means that there are many people on low incomes who pay no federal tax but do pay provincial tax, Mr. Speaker, and they are living lives of quiet desperation, Mr. Speaker, and yet this government's response is to increase their energy costs, increase their power bills. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the Financial Measures Act, as usual, there is a grab bag of unrelated provisions. The only thing that they have in common is that they are somehow connected to the budget. So please excuse me if I take a few minutes sort of to go through and hit the highlights. Normally on second reading, of course, we talk about the theme of the bill, but there is no theme really in a Financial Measures Act, just like in the Justice Administration Act, where it's just bits and pieces all over the place. The first provision of the bill raises fees. Now, members of the House will recall that it's not very long ago that the government enacted another across-the-board increase in government fees. Now, this government likes to say that they haven't raised taxes during their time in office, but that's not true. We all know it's not true. The only thing that is correct, Mr. Speaker, is they haven't raised income tax. That's really the refinement that needs to be added, because they have relentlessly raised other taxes, other fees, during their time in office. This is not the first across-the-board increase in fees that this government has imposed, Mr. Speaker, making life more difficult and more expensive for people like the gentleman whose letter I just read, Mr. Speaker. And there are, throughout the Financial Measures Act, various statutes being amended to reflect the increase in fees, except, Mr. Speaker, for one category of Nova Scotians for whom fees are going down. Now, who is that, Mr. Speaker? Is that the senior citizen living on an income of $11,000? No, Mr. Speaker, it's a certain category of corporation, known as unlimited liability companies, whose fees are going down. Mr. Speaker, I am not sure that that's a good choice. In comparison to the relentless increase in taxes and fees imposed on other Nova Scotians, to pick out one category, a certain kind of corporation that's really a paper creation down in accounting firms and law firms on Lower Water Street, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure most Nova Scotians would think that that was a good choice. But indeed, their fees are going down. Now, Mr. Speaker, the next section deals with, is the first of several sections dealing with changing fiscal relations with the municipalities. And this really, in its essence, is a good thing, because municipalities have been saying for a long time that the province has forced them to pick up too much of the tab of the cost of municipal services. So Section 3, for example, lowers the municipal contribution for corrections, and there's another one for education and so on, another one for housing. But here's the significant thing, Mr. Speaker. For example, with respect to the mandatory contribution on corrections, it's not lowered this year. It's not made retroactive to last year. In fact, this year it stays the same. And the year after that, it stays the same. And it only starts going down later. So what the government is doing is what you might call back-end loading all these cost items, the items that represents a real expenditure on the part of the province, but they're not doing it today, they're not doing it tomorrow, they're doing it 2 years from now, so that they can say they're doing it, but it is probably 2 years from now, Mr. Speaker, I think we may be post-election, 2 years from now. Because we're already 2 years past the last election, Mr. Speaker, and I suspect that 2 years from now, we will be, whoever it is who's presenting the budget, it will be whoever emerges from the next election with the most seats. So it's the next government that's going to have to worry about who's going to pay the piper, Mr. Speaker. And this government has chosen this tactic again and again and again, making big announcements, but the actual spending is pushed far into the future. Now, Mr. Speaker, this government, if they don't win the next election, is going to make sure that the cupboard is bare for the next government. They're going to spend money years into the future, Mr. Speaker. And this is an example of how they're going to do it. If it is the right thing to do to reduce the mandatory municipal contribution to corrections, Mr. Speaker, then it would be the right thing to do it today, not to push it off for a couple of years. And, Mr. Speaker, I will resist the urge to talk about the state of corrections in Nova Scotia today, never mind who's paying for it. Now, Mr. Speaker, as we move on, there's a change in the royalty rate on gypsum mining, although I haven't actually seen any government documents about this represents an increase or a decrease. It may be one or the other. Certainly isn't evident just from reading the words of the Act. All we know is that it's a change. And then we get into a number of changes to the Income Tax Act. And, Mr. Speaker, we are, of course, pleased to see that the government is matching the federal change that allows people to split their pension income. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I don't often drag my parents into debates in this House, Mr. Speaker, but the ability to split my father's pension income is the single best tax change that my parents have experienced probably in their lifetime. It is going to be a tremendous benefit to senior couples of whom one is receiving a pension and the other person is receiving no income. No pension income, which describes my parents, Mr. Speaker. I grew up in a fairly traditional family with a working father and a stay-at-home mother. And so my father has a pension, my mother does not. But this is going to result in thousands of dollars of benefits, Mr. Speaker, to my parents. The federal change will, and we're pleased to see that this provincial change mirrors that, because that truly is a benefit to many Nova Scotians. Then we get on to the public transit tax credit. And this is an interesting topic, Mr. Speaker, because on the one hand, you have to say, well, it can't be a bad thing. But let's not exaggerate the impact that this is going to have. It represents a few extra dollars a year, but only for those Nova Scotians who buy transit passes. Now, when I was knocking on doors in the fall, Mr. Speaker, I came across a woman in the Cowie Hill district who said to me, why can't this apply to bus tickets? She takes the bus a lot, but she doesn't take it enough to get a bus pass. But she's going to be left out of this ability to claim a tax credit, however meager, for her bus tickets. So if there's any ability on the part of the government to consider that change or how it might work, I would commend it to the government's attention. But let's be realistic, Mr. Speaker. This transit tax credit amounts to a few dollars a year. It is not going to change anybody's behavior. If people already take the bus, then they're going to get a small benefit on their provincial tax, if they pay provincial tax at all, because it's a non-refundable credit. And that's a good thing, Mr. Speaker, because it's going to make up for the $100 a year that the government's taking on their electricity bill. So they're going to be able to get a little bit back. Not all of it, but a little bit. But let's face it, Mr. Speaker, if anybody's driving a car and is trying to decide whether to take the bus in Nova Scotia, it's not this tax credit that's going to get them out of their car and onto the bus. The amount of the money is minuscule compared, Mr. Speaker, to the cost-benefit analysis that would be involved in deciding whether to take the bus rather than taking a car. So, although this will provide a small benefit to existing transit users, let's not kid ourselves that this is going to get a lot of people onto the bus who weren't going to be there otherwise, Mr. Speaker, particularly because, again, it applies only to people who buy monthly bus passes. It doesn't apply to anybody else who takes the bus. You must take the bus essentially every day in order to get the benefit of this credit. The recreational activity tax credit, Mr. Speaker. Now, this is an interesting one because it wasn't that long before the budget that somebody who belongs to the same athletic club that I do, and believe it or not, I do belong to an athletic club, Mr. Speaker. It's a martial arts club, believe it or not, Mr. Speaker, although with the I've got a long way to go to be a black belt. Let's just leave it at that, Mr. Speaker. But I haven't been attending much lately because of the long hours that we sit, and of course the classes are during the evening. But one of the other young men who's a member of that club said to me, why can't the recreational tax credit apply to me? And he's a young man in his 20s. He's a student at Dalhousie University. And anybody who's done martial arts knows that there's a fair amount of outlay involved in entering tournaments, paying for tests, paying for the equipment, the protective equipment that we all need in order to spar, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to see that that young man will get the benefit of this credit. Now, it'll be interesting to see what parameters the government puts around this recreational tax credit, because we can assume that, for example, if somebody is going to their local private golf club for a round of golf, that's not going to qualify for the recreational tax credit, or will it? Because we see that the rules say that the regulations have to say which activities or clubs are allowable and which are not, but we have to assume that it's not going to apply to simply every activity. There is a question in my mind, Mr. Speaker, based on what I've seen around the community that I represent, about whether the recreational tax credit actually results in more children getting exercise. Same point that I made about the transit tax credit, Mr. Speaker, is the kids who are already participating in sports will, their parents, of course the kids aren't paying tax, but the parents will get the benefit of the recreational tax credit. But I'm not sure that the amount of money involved, which when you deal with a percentage of the outlay, Mr. Speaker, which doesn't at the end of the day amount to an awful lot of money, whether that would entice families to put their children in recreational programs if they couldn't afford it in the first place. it's a benefit to families who are already there, who can already afford it. Is it enough to get people into the programs who aren't there? I don't know, Mr. Speaker. I haven't seen any data on it. It would be good to see what information the government has on that. I'm a little bit dubious based on what I've seen, as I say, in the community that I represent, Mr. Speaker. The kids who were playing hockey before are still playing hockey, getting the benefit of the credit. The kids who were playing soccer before, still playing soccer, they're getting the benefit of the credit. But is there one child that I can identify that didn't used to play soccer that because of the credit is playing soccer? I haven't seen it, Mr. Speaker. Maybe they're out there. And I have the same concern here, Mr. Speaker. Although anything that encourages physical activity among Nova Scotians of any age, Mr. Speaker, is to be applauded. Another income tax change here, Mr. Speaker, is allowing a tax credit for alternative medical expenses. Now, this is a good thing. This is something I actually advocated several years ago. There was a gentleman in my constituency who came to me. It was actually his spouse who'd incurred a great deal of expense going to I'm not sure I can pronounce a naturopath, and wondered why it was that they couldn't get a tax credit for it. It couldn't take advantage of the medical expense tax credit. And that's because naturopaths were not recognized as a legitimate expense under the medical tax credit, Mr. Speaker. And unfortunately, it's too late, Mr. Speaker, because the person involved has since passed away, which is truly unfortunate. But I take this to be a progressive change, that we have to be more open-minded to non-traditional medicines, and it's nice to see the government recognizing naturopaths as something for which the medical expense tax credit can be changed, or I'm sorry, can be claimed. Then, Mr. Speaker, we have a number of perfectly routine changes to the Income Tax Act. We see the extension of the firefighter tax credit to people involved in volunteer ground search and rescue. Who could oppose that, Mr. Speaker? Not anybody that I'm acquainted with. Get to the film industry tax credit, Mr. Speaker, and again, this is being boosted in an attempt to retain the film industry here in Nova Scotia, a good industry which provides solid technical jobs. But this is, Mr. Speaker, every province is trying to race to be ahead of the other. I remember in the days when it was much lower credit, every year it seemed to go up another 5%, then we got into combination deals where if you did 3 pictures, you got a higher credit. If you went outside Metro Halifax, you got a higher credit. I just wonder sometimes how far the film industry tax credit will go, because now we're raising it again, and we know for a certainty that other provinces will outdo us. By this time next year, other provinces will have outdone us, and we'll have to increase it again. And that's a good thing, Mr. Speaker. It's a good industry. We want to keep those jobs here in Nova Scotia. Some fabulous productions have been made in Nova Scotia, and long may that continue. Mr. Speaker, the last 4 or 5 things I've talked about have all been so positive, and I want to end on a positive note for tonight. I don't want to go back to the deficiencies of the government, many though they may be. And so, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I move that debate on the Financial Measures Act be adjourned.
Thank you. Is it agreed? Great. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. I move that we adjourn to meet tomorrow, where the hours will be from 8 a.m. until 2 p.m. Following the daily routine, move into Committee of the Whole House and Supply. Time pending from there, if there's any remaining. Public bills for second reading. Following bill numbers 120, 130, 131, 133, 148, 151, and 156.
The motion before the House is for the House to rise and meet again tomorrow at 8 a.m. The House will sit between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The House stands adjourned until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning.